Hey guys, welcome to week 10 of COMM 313. I hope you are all doing well. Make sure to stay safe and most importantly healthy. Wash your hands, make sure to stay indoors so we can help slow down the spread of the coronavirus right now. I hope you guys are all doing well. And I want to let you know if you have any questions whatsoever, please make sure to reach out to me. You can call me, text me, or even email me. I want to make sure I'm available to you guys 7 days a week. So if you need anything whatsoever, please make sure to reach out. Just as a reminder, last week, remember, we combined weeks 9 and 10. So during week 9, we were supposed to go over chapters 10 and 11, but I went ahead and canceled it to kind of give you guys a week to get settled in with everything that was going on. During week 10, we were going to cover chapters 12 and 13. So now you can see all four of them are covered here during this week. So please make sure to go over our syllabus as well, because next week you will have your second discussion board and a quiz to complete as well. Let's go ahead and open up the syllabus and take a quick look. So 9 and 10 were combined, so chapters 10 through 13. So next week during week 11, you're going to have your discussion form to complete along with quiz for chapters 3. Then after that, we have homework week 2, followed by Easter break. All right, guys, so let's go ahead and review chapters 10 through 13. Let's go ahead and open up chapter 10. So here we're going to be talking about issues management. So we're going to take a look at how issues evolve, how these types of issues affect organizations, and how best to respond to issues through different communication strategies. This is a good chapter that's going to help prepare you for our following chapter, which is crisis communications, because now you're going to kind of have to have a good understanding of the foundation of dealing with issues before it comes to a crisis and how to deal with it, which is what chapter 11 is going to be talking about. So, defining an issue. What exactly is an issue in an organization? It's a public concern about the organization's decision and operations. And I'm sure you've seen quite a bit of issues in recent news stories of different things going on, and what an actual issue might be. And this is something that is definitely going to affect the perception of an organization depending how they approach it. And this is where the public's concern comes into play. So, an issue often involves a matter that is contention with another party, such as maybe activists, consumers, publics, and they often require decisive action to maintain reputation. So, there's a lot of things to keep in mind. For example, one that is being discussed in the news right now, an issue, is that I'm not sure if you have heard, but there have been two recent airplane crashes with the Boeing 737 Maxes, is what they're called. And these airplane crashes have taken place over the last, I believe, 4 or 5 months. And these are new planes that were just purchased by, I believe, American Airlines, United, and another American based airlines. But a lot of airlines in the European Union and also China have bought these airplanes as well. Well, there's been big concern because this is the second plane crash within 4 or 5 months, because of, they're not sure exactly, but it might be some kind of software issue, but they really don't know exactly what's going on. Well, the European Union and China have shut down all flights which contain these Boeing 737 Maxes, and the United States has not done so. I believe it's the FAA has not grounded the planes yet. So it's kind of a more of a public concern of, hey, what's going on? Why is Europe and China grounding these planes, but the United States is not? So questions come into race. Some people are saying, ethics are not playing too big of an important role here because there would be so much loss of money, not only for Boeing, but for the airlines as well. Who knows what's going on? But again, this is an issue that we're currently facing right now. Now, looking at a crisis. So after an issue has become active, it may increase the pressure on an organization to do something about it. So now we're not at a crisis yet, but in the next few weeks, you're going to see this story building and building, because now what's going on is the FAA is investigating why these plane crashes happen, and they're going to need to come out with an answer, because if it's something that the plane has that's at fault, this is something that the United States now needs to shut down operations with these planes. Well, if they don't shut down, which they have not done so yet, we may be going into a crisis. So it's a good idea to kind of follow this story, see what's going on with it. And it's also an issue that requires decisive and immediate action from the organization. So this issue, even though it's just an issue right now, it can turn into a crisis. So it is an interesting story to follow for those of you who would like to. And this graph shows the development of an issue into a crisis. So you could see here, this is time, and then you have pressure. Now, as time increases, you're going to see that an issue is going to be latent, then active, then intense, and then here's where it turns into a crisis. So as time continues on and pressure increases, this is the part where it's going to be a crisis. So right now with those Boeing, the airplanes are called a Boeing 737 MAX. Because they have maximum comfort. I believe that's why the name is there. But you can see as time increases, or as time goes on, the pressure is going to increase. So I would say we're probably here in the active stage about what's going on with this issue. It's not a crisis yet, but can you imagine, God forbid something happens with another one of these planes, what's going to happen with these with the FAA of not grounding, the federal administration for not grounding these flights in the United States? That would increase it to a crisis. Or what if, let's say there isn't a plane, an additional plane crash, the planes fly okay throughout the United States, but then in a week they determine that, hey, there is a malfunction with these planes. Can you now imagine what would happen with the public's perception of, wait a minute, there is a problem with the plane, but yet you allowed these flights to continue over the last week or so? That would also be a crisis as well. So it's interesting to see where this is going to go and what's going to happen. My whole background and with flying is, because I do fly a lot, is I'd rather be safe than sorry. If it were me, I would ground the planes. But right now the FAA is not, due to whatever those reasons may be, which I think the underlying issue may be more of money and financial concerns. But at the same time, this is something that is going to need to be looked at over the next week or so. Keep your eyes on this story to see what happens and if this turns into a crisis. Managing issues. So the process of managing issues consists of environmental scanning, issue identification analysis, and issue-specific response strategies and evaluation. So you could see here we have the acronym of the STEP of demographic, economic, social, technological, ecological, and political for the environmental scanning, which is this bullet point here. And so we do have a SWOT analysis when you're looking at environmental scanning. This is where you look at the strengths, the weaknesses, any kind of opportunities or threats. So issue identification and analysis, this is where we determine the present intensity of the issue by considering, okay, how likely is it to trigger government action or impact on public opinion, the likelihood of the issue continuing, the ability of the organization to influence its resolution, and the key stakeholder groups and publics that are involved with the issue. So think of this one right here, the key stakeholder group. So imagine these people who have invested money in United Airlines and they have stocks and in American Airlines as well. Think of what kind of issue this is. These people are probably, thinking, wow, if they ground these planes, I'm sure the airlines is going to lose money. But at the same time, now this is where moral and ethics come into play. So you can see there's so many variables that are affecting what's going on with this issue. And this is the position importance matrix. This is where you have opposed position on and issue support. So if you have something that has low priority, you're going to look more at the issue support of what the issue may be. And this is the life cycle of an issue. You can kind of see how it goes here clockwise. You have, an emergence of something, then you have a debate. This is kind of what's going on with this airline issue now, codification, and then enforcement of what's going on. So in the United States, we're here on the debate part of the life cycle of an issue. Whereas in the European Union and in China, they have already reached the enforcement part. They have already grounded their planes. The emergence of the issue came about. They debated on what they should do. With codification, they decided, you know what, this is something where we have we have to keep our moral grounds, and then they enforced the grounding of all these 737 Boeing 737 Max airplanes. So you do have some issue-specific response strategies. You have a buffering strategy. It's an attempt to stonewall the issue and delay its development. It's kind of similar to what's going on here in the United States. Bridging strategy involves organizations being open to change and recognizing the issue and its inev- inevitability, and then advocacy strategy, an attempt to try to change stakeholder expectations and public opinions on an issue through issue campaigns and lobbying. So this advocacy strategy probably will not work now, given the fact that the EU and China has grounded all their planes, whereas the United States is more in a buffering strategy. They're trying to stonewall the issue by saying, hey, we don't know exactly what's wrong with these planes, so we need to run an investigation before we ground them. So those are things to keep in mind. And of course, the choice of strategy often depends on the intensity of the issue, the importance of an issue, and obviously the values and beliefs of managers in an organization. So you do have continuous evaluation, knowing what the stage of the issue is. I guarantee the FAA is looking at this constantly and evaluating, hey, what's going on? Where are we now? Have we figured anything else out? And then when you're looking at influencing public policy, you have a few different ways you can do it. You have an indirect influence. This is an advocate a certain framing to influence the government. So it's more of an indirect approach. Then you have direct influence. This is more like when you're trying to lobby to convince the public of something. And then you have your industry coalitions, an alliance of organizations in the same industry who lobby or donate to influence policy formation process. Now let's take a look at crisis management. Crisis communication for Chapter 11. So we're going to look at preparing and planning for crisis and identifying appropriate crisis communication strategies. So this is the preparation for crisis. You have 5 levels of contingency plans. You have stage 1 through 5. Stage 1 is kind of more of a minimal planning. Stage 2 is a little bit more extensive. Stage 3, you could see as we continue through the stages, they're getting a little bit more extensive with what needs to be done. And then stage 5, finally involves all the previous stages, but also incorporates environmental scanning and early warning systems to identify crisis as early as possible. And here we have a crisis type matrix. So if we have something that's more internal and it's unintentional, this is more of an accident. Whereas if we have something that's external and intentional, you can see on the other side of the spectrum, this is considered to be terrorism. And so this is a non-existence crisis communication strategy. So you have denial, clarification, and attack and intimidation. So with denial, this is a simple statement denying that a crisis exists, kind of like what the United States is doing right now with their airplanes. They're saying, hey, we don't know what's going on, so we don't really have a crisis yet. Then you have clarification. This is an extension of the denial tactic, which attempts to explain why there is no crisis. And then you have attack and intimidation. This is more of a confronting the person or group who claims that a crisis exists. And this is more of a distance crisis communication strategy where you have excuse and you downplay. An excuse is more of a tactic of denying intention, and where downplay, you're convincing stakeholders or the general public that the situation is not that bad in itself or compared to another crisis. It's kind of like, if you were in high school and if you ever brought home a grade, mid-semester and it was a D on a test, your parents are going to say, hey, what's going on? This is where you kind of try to downplay it and say, hey, well, look, it's a D, but it's only 10% of my grade. I'm going to move forward. I'm going to study harder. You're downplaying the issue. Here's where we have association with bolstering and transcendence. You're reminding stakeholders and the general public of existing positive aspects. So you're looking more of more of a proactive glass half full type of way. And then with transcendence, you're associating the negatives and loss arising from a crisis with a desirable higher order goal, such as animal testing is done to develop life-saving drugs. And then you have association, where victimization. It's a tactic of portraying the organization as a victim of the crisis in order to win public sympathy. Here we have acceptance and accommodation. So once you accept the crisis has happened and you take it into consideration that, what, this is an issue. Now it's a crisis. We need to address it. You have a full apology, remediation, a repentance, accommodation strategy, and then you even have a rectification with the accommodation strategy. So if you look at the acceptance strategy, the first three here, with the full apologizing, you're just apologizing for what's happening, or you can announce some form of compensation to help victims, such as money or goods, and then you can also even ask for forgiveness. And then with accommodation strategy, you're really taking the corrective action to prevent the reoccurrence from happening again. So communicating about a crisis, whether it's a natural accident or transgression, this is the way the organization moves forward with it, even with a terrorist attack as well. And when you are crisis planning, it's important to develop communication plans. This way you have a good idea of what to expect to move forward, and so on and so on. And in a major crisis, you're going to have a press office. This is where field media inquires and manage information. You may have a safe crisis location where media can meet and be debriefed on an event, or even identify contacts at relevant external agencies who may need to be contacted as well. All right, so chapter 12, we're going to talk a little bit about leadership and change communication. This is actually one of my favorite chapters because my background is actually in leadership. That's what my doctorate is in. So I always appreciate and enjoy learning and lecturing about anything that has to do with leadership and change communication especially in organizations, corporate organizations to be specific. So in this chapter, we're going to look at the definition of leadership communication. We are going to discuss various ways in which communication can be used effectively to initiate and realize organizational change, which includes narratives and stories promoting a change, and information and interactive strategies that allow employees to understand and realize change as well. So defining leadership. So often leaders are considered born to lead, which means, this is just something that we have inside of us. This is something where we want to make sure that we implement leadership, and we implement whether it's directions on how to do something, whatever it may be, but it's something that we have inside us where we want to help others. Two, increasingly popular perspective on leadership is one which suggests it can be acquired and developed, and leadership can definitely be situational. So the good news is we can all learn how to implement leadership, not only in our own personal lives, but also in the workplace as well too. So leaders, it's a way in which they approach others and provide direction, implement plans, motivate others, which has a big idea on communication and behavior. It's kind of like that saying where, if you tell me you're hungry, I can bring you fish to eat. But if you tell me you're hungry, I can show you how to fish. That way, you don't have to come back up to me again and keep telling me, hey, I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I'm hungry, and I have to keep giving you fish every day, every day, every day, and feeding you. Rather, if you come up and tell me that you're hungry, I can show you how to fish. I can give you the tools and the education that you need in order to trap fish, cook fish, in order to eat fish. That way, the following day, you can do the same thing. Now I have led you on how to feed yourself, how to catch fish, so that way I can concentrate on other things. And this is something that leaders do in the workplace. This reflects their philosophy, personality and experience, and also organizational situation. Kind of like my philosophy, I like getting my students my cell phone number so that way they can contact me with anything that they may need. I remember when I was in college, I might have a question or two, so I would email my professor. I wouldn't get a response for 2 or 3 days later, and by that time, my report or whatever my question might have been due the next day. So my philosophy is to make myself available to students at all times, 7 days a week. So that's what I try to do for you guys in order to make sure that you are comfortable in taking this class. And if you ever have any questions, you can always reach out to me. It also has to do with this reflects their organizational situation. What kind of job are you in? What is your position title, and so on. So there are leadership styles. They focus efforts on a common goal for a group or team. If someone is a good leader, they are going to try to make sure that everybody in the group passes, everybody in the team learns something, and everybody gets their work done. So keep in mind that with your leadership style, it's going to be dependent on kind of what job you are in. What organization are you in? How are you going to influence and shape the interpretations of others in the organization? So keep that in mind. So there's two different types of leadership styles. There's transactional leadership and transformational leadership. I myself am considered to be more of a transformational leader than a transactional leader. And so we'll kind of talk a little bit about both and the difference between the two. So transactional leadership, the leader is concerned with completion of specific tasks. They use designated authority, exchanging rewards for performance. Incentives are used to motivate employees and lack broader or long-term strategic vision. So this is more something someone who needs to get something done. They have to get something completed, and they're going to make sure that it gets completed by all means necessary. Whereas in transformational leadership, they set broad strategic goals. They have broader visions, are mobilized by leaders to motivate employees and foster collaboration between them. Range of influencing and motivational tactics to push and support subordinates to higher performance levels, and they provide personal and progressive growth opportunities. So I'll give you a good example of the difference between the two. So if you are a doctor in the emergency room, and let's say it's one of the busiest emergency rooms in the United States, in this case, you are going to need to be a transactional leader. For example, let's say someone comes into the ER and they have, let's say, a big cut on their leg, and this is something that needs to be done quickly. The job needs to get done, and the leader needs to be concerned with the completion of tasks. The doctor is going to take the patient, they're going to assess it, they're going to talk to their colleagues, figure out what they need to get done, and they're going to get it fixed sooner rather than later. That's a transactional style. Whereas with transformational, you're going to have more of an approach to make sure there's good collaboration. You're providing motivation for coworkers. For example, a great transformational leader might maybe be a manager at Nordstrom's, and they have employees that they work with. They're going to try to motivate their employees. Hey, during our holiday season, make sure you get your sales up. We need to make sure we're all on the same page. They're going to do what they can. So you won't see that transformational leadership in an emergency room doctor. If you come in with a big cut on your leg and it needs attentiveness right now, the doctor's not going to look at you and say, "Hey, how's everything with you? Are you okay? Is there anything I can do to make this better?" Rather, in transactional leadership, they're going to take that approach. They're going to fix it right away without hesitation. So leadership is required during the management of change, and organizational changes have often been classified in terms of degrees of change, whether it's major or radical or even minor and convergent. And change can also be defined in terms of its time frame, such as maybe it's something that's going to be more evolutionary or even revolutionary. So you have additive changes and substantive changes. So in additive changes, this is the update of the old organization and may involve, for example, improvements to way of working. Maybe Loyola University is going to update Sakai and get a brand new management system, learning management system. This is more of an additive change. Substantive changes, departures from the old organization and its major strategic change that often involves a redefinition of the organization's mission and purpose or a substantial restructuring of the organization. So maybe they just come in and say, okay, we're not going to even use an online learning management system. We're going to completely change everything, and we're going to substitute it with something brand new. Rather, where additive change is, upgrading Sakai into their new version. So when you're managing change, there's some steps that you need to refer to. So when you are looking at the change, step one, create a sense of urgency. Two, form a guiding coalition. Three, create a vision. Four, communicate the vision to everybody so they understand what you're trying to do, where you want to go. Five, empower others to act on the vision. Six, create quick wins. Seven, build on the change. And eight, institutionalize the change. And this will help you form and how to be effective in the change that you're trying to do. So factors affecting the choice of change communication strategy. So if there's a high need for communication efficiency and a high need for consensus building, this is going to be the quid pro quo strategy. If it's high need for communication efficiency but low needs for consensus building, this is going to be more of a need to know strategy, and so on with your low need as well. So let's take a look at putting change in perspective, the difference of additive versus substantive changes. So here's a definition for additive and substantive changes. Here's the nature of change. So additive is going to be more of a small scale. Substantive is going to be more of a large scale, and so on. So make sure you're kind of familiar with this chart. You have a good understanding between the two, so this way you can implement this moving forward in the workplace if needed. So here's change management as a persuasion process. So whenever you're trying to maybe persuade employees to adapt a plan or customers to join something, whatever it may be, this is the change management process. So let's take a look at this. So phase one, this is where you're going to convince employees that the radical change is imperative and demonstrate why the new direction is the right one. I have a good buddy of mine who was working for a bank and it was bought out by another bank. And when it was bought out by the other bank, they weren't going to change the name of the old bank to the new bank and put it in the new bank until for another year. So what they did was they went ahead and they announced the plan. Then in phase two, the position and frame preliminary plan. This is where you gather feedback and announce the final plan. So this is where you're kind of letting employees know, hey, this is what we're going to be changing, what we're going to be doing. You're giving them almost a year to adapt. Phase three, this is where you manage employee mood through constant communication. And phase four, reinforce behavioral guidelines to avoid backsliding. So there's a plan, this change management as a persuasion process is important to understand because this is what's going to help you manage the change when you need to persuade people of certain things. So change communication, this is where employee change communication strategies will come in. You have the spray and pray, tell and sell, underscore and explore, identify and reply, and withhold and uphold. Make sure you are familiar with all 5 of these as well, which your textbook talks about more in detail. So communication efficiency is needed when it is physically impossible to communicate face-to-face with all employees. Resources devoted to change communication are scarce, and there is an urgent need to progress through the change process. And consensus building is needed when changes are perceived to be radical and or controversial. There is history of resistance to similar change. Critical resources are controlled by employees, and ongoing support and cooperation are needed to maintain the change. So when you're looking at effective leadership communication, you have authenticity, narratives and stories, and conversational skills. So authenticity, it's a truthful and passionate commitment to be clear, inspiring change idea. This is when you're being authentic in your leadership style. Narratives and stories, they present the rationale for the change, the steps needed to realize it, and the overall beneficial outcomes as a result of it. Kind of like what my buddy went through when he was working for a bank and it was bought out by a bigger bank. This was more of a narrative and story type of effective leadership communication that upper management did. And conversational skills is mobilizing conversations at the interpersonal level to enable others in the organization to see possibilities that they have missed. So chapter 13 is going to look at the corporate social responsibility and community relations. We're not going to go into too much detail about this chapter. This is something that is going to kind of really help you have a better understanding of your corporate social responsibility, which we have discussed in the textbook. But this will give you a good overview, and it discusses the concepts of corporate citizenship and corporate social responsibility. It examines community relations, such as an area of corporate communication that is closely aligned with the company's goals and the reputations that they have. So when you are looking at CSR, there are a couple things you need to keep in mind. It's about accountability towards the whole of society, not just the shareholders and customers. Down here, there's an article talking about the BP Gulf of Mexico oil spill. Well, when this oil spill occurred, in the beginning, you could see that the company they knew it was going to get out eventually, so they were kind of trying to hide it in the beginning. And rather than letting everybody know right away what happened so it can get fixed right away, they tried fixing it themselves. Took a little bit longer than usual, and the oil, more oil than what could have been coming out, came out into the ocean. If they had kind of made it more their corporate social responsibility right away to notify the public, notify any kind of environmental agencies, they could have figured out right away a way to fix this issue, so that way not that much oil spilled out into the ocean. So in this case, their corporate social responsibility was extremely low by not letting everybody know about it. So, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development was written in 2002, and it talks about the continuing commitment by business to contribute to economic development while improving the quality of life of the workforce and their families, as well as the community and society at large. This is something that Tesla does very well. They're trying to make, vehicles not only more efficient, but also better for our planet. Corporate citizenship. This is the portfolio of activities that organizations undertake to fulfill perceived duties as members of society. So, what kind of corporate citizenship does a certain company have? What is it that they do in order to make their corporate social responsibility stand out? So, examples of corporate citizenship include maybe pro bono activities. These are things that the company might do for free. Maybe they volunteer some time to the Boys and Girls Club, corporate volunteerism, such as that, charitable contributions, or support for community initiatives. So, with corporate social responsibility, you have the triple bottom line. This is where you have profits, planet, and people. And these are the three things that they all need to be concerned about. So, profit was considered the conventional bottom line. So, back in the day, everybody just looked at profits. Now, people are looking more at the profits, the planet, and the people. Does this help the people? Does this help keep our planet efficient and safe? And do we still make profits at the same time? CSR codes, these are just a few guidelines in the UN Global Compact Principles if you want to take a look at them. But there are three standard communication strategies. So you have stakeholder information strategy. This is where it's just one-way information flow. This is where the company communicates to the stakeholder, hey, this is what we're doing for our CSR. Then you have stakeholder response strategy. This is where you can communicate back and forth with your stakeholder. And this is your stakeholder involvement strategy, where you have mutual dialogue between a company and its stakeholders. You consider what they say, you might negotiate, and so on. So greenwashing, take a look at this in your textbook. This will kind of give you a better idea of what it means between CSR rhetoric and CSR implementation. This isn't something that you need to know too much detail about, but have a good understanding of it. CSR reporting and dialogue. This is where you publish reports, you launch CSR campaigns. You let the public know what is going on. What is it that your company and organization is doing? And here are some reporting guidelines. Go ahead and read through these as well. So community relations, this relates to communications and engagement with residents of the local community in which the company resides with its facilities, such as specialized area of activity within corporate communication. Like a job that I used to work at, they actually had a whole department where they focused on CSR. What is it that our company can do in order to help the community? How are we going to let the public know what it is we're doing? And so on. And here are some community stakeholders. You have small business and shopkeepers, activists, individuals, community groups, and so on. They all are a stakeholder within the company if it has to do with them. And these are characteristics of the old and new approaches to community relationships. So let's take a look at scope of community programs. So charitable donations prior to 1980. These were charitable donations to local charities and causes. Then you have community involvement, which is more occurred in the 80s. Employee volunteer programs, growing involvement in social welfare programs. And corporate citizenship, these are partnerships with local public institutions and improving the community and increasing welfare. So now you can see how prior to 1980, you just made charitable donations. Whereas now, you have partnerships, you have people from the organization volunteering and so on. And these are the elements of community relationship programs. So you have partnerships, volunteering, and philanthropy. And this is more of your level of commitment to the community and the alignment between program elements. So, make sure when you are working in your organization, you have a good understanding of how you're going to be able to help contribute to your corporate social responsibility. So that's it for chapter 13. All right, guys, that's it for chapter 10. I wish you guys all the best of luck. Make sure to stay safe and healthy out there and wash your hands, guys. We'll see you next week for week 11. Take care.